Okay, we're now going to hand it back over to Brother Lyons.
All right, so you all are troopers for having been here the last 2 hours, and one more, maybe about a 45-minute or so session to go. Maybe we can get through it and get you all out. And some of you, hopefully all of you, will be worshiping somewhere tomorrow, and if you're here, it would be a blessing to worship our awesome God together. So we've talked about some of what the Bible says about this subject matter. We've looked at some historical sources. We've also now are entering into looking at some of the physical evidence for the coexistence of humans and dinosaurs. And I would contend that this first piece of evidence that we're going to show is absolutely amazing and should at the very least cause atheistic evolutionists to pause, maybe scratch their heads and ask themselves, maybe our timeline, which is all based on assumptions, by the way, our timeline isn't quite so accurate. Several years ago, Dr. Mary Schweitzer and her colleagues, they were excavating a Tyrannosaurus rex femur. And it was this is as I understand it, and I've talked to Dr. Mary Schweitzer on the phone. She was nice enough to take at least 1 or 2 of my phone calls several years ago. And as I understand it, the dinosaur femur, a fossil is a bone that is no longer made up of what it used to be. It's now made up of rock. And the elements that are in the rock are now in the bone. They've replaced those elements. And so a bone is even heavier now than it used to be. It's still in the form of that. And so they were excavating this fossil, and it was so big they couldn't get the whole thing on the helicopter, as I understand it, and so they purposefully broke it. And oftentimes, if you have a fossil, maybe you found a fossil, and it's very rare to find, complete fossilized bones that are not partially chipped or broken. But, most people don't just say, oh, this is a cool fossil, I'm going to break it. It's, like, oh, this is really neat. I have a piece of a fossil of a dinosaur in my office, but I wish it wasn't just a piece. I wish it was the whole thing. Well, they intentionally broke this to get it on the helicopter, to then take it back to the lab. And when they began to study this particular fossil, they discovered that it wasn't totally fossilized. It was a dinosaur bone that was not at all completely fossilized. In fact, they indicated in Science magazine, soft tissues are preserved within hind limb elements of Tyrannosaurus rex. Removal of the mineral phase reveals transparent, flexible, hollow blood vessels. Some regions of demineralized bone matrix are highly fibrous, and the matrix possesses elasticity and resilience. I mean, listen, even my body doesn't feel that elastic and resilient these days. I'm not that old, but here is a dinosaur bone being described by a scientist from North Carolina State University of a dinosaur bone that is supposedly at least 65 million years old. The demineralized fragment is flexible and resilient, and when stretched, returns to its original shape. I'm just out of curiosity, not wanting to embarrass anyone, but I'm just curious. How many of you knew about this information before tonight? We got a few hands. I mean, isn't this something that you would think, wait just a minute, if we're going to tell kids and everyone else that dinosaurs are tens of millions of years old, and that they went extinct allegedly 65 plus millions of years. Shouldn't it be this is on the front page of newspapers, that this is on the front page of websites and on the world news tonight, and wait a minute, guys, Jurassic Park? I'm not saying that that's real. I'm just saying, wait a minute. You can almost see why they're getting some of these ideas. Well, you mean you found a dinosaur bone that still has soft, flexible, fibrous, resilient tissue in it? That sounds like something I ate at KFC a few weeks ago. And then they mentioned In a separate article, that demineralization of femur and tibia fragments revealed the preservation of fibrous, flexible, and apparent original tissues, as well as cells and blood vessels. Look at the pictures. Does this, if someone were to say, well, this is a dinosaur, this is dinosaur tissue that's being stretched. I'm sorry, how old did you say this was again? Do you think that this might be, evidence, like physical, in-your-face bone from a T-Rex that's not fossilized? Did y'all ever see the show Different Strokes? You remember there was one character that would say, "What you talking about, Willis?" That's just what comes to my mind when I see this. Well, we have stretchy, elastic, fibrous, flexible, apparent hollow blood vessels and apparent blood cells that are at least 65 million years old. What you talking about? What? Here is a different dinosaur tissue from a Thescelosaurus vertebra that actually was uncovered, excavated by creationists, and under their microscopes, they're finding some of the same things. This is a different dinosaur from a different location that was not completely fossilized. And you know what they're finding? Some of the same things. Allegedly, here are some of the breaking news headlines from Associated Press. 70-million-year-old Tyrannosaurus rex fossil dug out of a hunk of sandstone has yielded soft tissue, including blood vessels. But let's make sure we get at the very front part. It's 70 million years old. Well, wait, can we just leave that part off? Tyrannosaurus rex fossil dug out of a hunk of sandstone has yielded soft tissue, including blood vessels. Do you think that, and I could just see the headline, can we then say, is this really 70 million years old, or might it be much younger than that? Question mark. Can we please just be a little more honest with the evidence? Instead of it just feels like we're going to force, we see this a lot today. We're going to try to force you to believe one way. We're not going to consider any other possibilities. We're going to force you to believe this. Don't ignore this over here. This is 70 million years old. Yes, soft. Yes, fibrous. Yes, flexible. Tissue that's not completely bought. But it's 70 million years old. Maybe it's not. Oh, yes, it is. You're kicked out. You're canceled. There have been scientists who it's like, if you just, do we know this is 70 million? What did you say? Are you one of those crazy kooky creationists? You get out of here. There have been a lot of scientists just for questioning. I forgot. I think it's Baumgartner who wrote the book about dissidents, where he catalogs a number of scientists who have been basically canceled because they had the audacity to question, the beloved, don't you question the theory of evolution. MSNBC said paleontologists were stunned to find that the soft tissue of a 70-million-year-old dinosaur was preserved within a fossil of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Alan Boyle, who is a former science editor for MSNBC, said today, this was in July of 2007, today paleontologists are still stunned not only to find material that looks like dinosaur cartilage, blood vessels, blood cells, and bone cells, but to see the stuff in so many different specimens. FYI, what Mary Schweitzer uncovered was not an anomaly. Wait a minute. You mean they're finding dinosaur bones around the world that have soft, flexible, fibrous tissue in them? Yeah. That's what they're finding. There are a growing number of tissue samples, he said. It's not just a fluke occurrence. It's something that's more pervasive in the fossil record. NBC indicated in this same article They have excavated, if I remember correctly, that's not, yes. They have excavated a T-Rex and a hadrosaur from Montana, a Titanosaurus from Madagascar, and more samples that fossil hunter Jack Horner is finding in Mongolia as well as Montana with soft, flexible fibrous tissue in them. Regarding the hadrosaur specimen, not the T-Rex specimen, but a different specimen from a different dinosaur, in Montana, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, whom we quoted earlier, stated, it's the freshest, it's the freshest, if you will, dinosaur bone that has ever had this analysis conducted on it. I'm sorry, fresh, like fresh meat, fresh dinosaur bone cartilage. That's how old again? Oh, I called Dr. Schweitzer. I really just wanted to know, okay, I know that dating methods all have and all are based on some assumptions. Radiometric dating methods, where you are dealing with elements like uranium and lead and one element breaking down into another element over a time, those are all, and were said, billions of years of time, they're all based on assumptions, meaning that they assume that there was no daughter element in there to begin with, where the parent element was breaking down into the daughter element. They don't know how much of the daughter element was in there to begin with. They don't know if the rate of decay has always been the same. And they don't know if something has not entered into that rock. Water has a way of getting almost anywhere and everywhere. And what water does is water can take things out of something and make it go, I know this is not the same thing, but when I was floating down the Colorado River earlier this year, I was bundled up. I told you I don't like the cold. I was bundled up. I had thermals on. I had, other pants on. I had rain gear on. And I was strapped up this way and that way. And water? Still going down my back, all the way down my legs. Doesn't matter. I was strapped up. I had this and that. Jana, she saw what I was packing before I left. She knew what I had. Water will find a way to get through anywhere. And so what you have to assume is that there are no outside contaminants that have contaminated, you might say, the specimen that's being tested. Okay, so I understand that I wish our atheistic evolutionary friends would admit that they can't know what they say this earth is 4.5 billion years old. And even the more reliable radiocarbon dating still has some, you can't say for sure unless you have other kinds of dating methods that back it up. Like radiocarbon dating is carbon, all of us have carbon. Every living thing has carbon in it. And when we die, the carbon begins to dissipate. Now here's the thing, a lot of people don't understand this about radiocarbon dating, is that even evolutionists say that carbon-14 or radiocarbon dating, evolutionists understand it is only good for things that are, they would say, tens of thousands of years old. It is not, that evolutionists know you can't date anything that would be kind of evolutionary worthy with radiocarbon dating. Because they would say all the carbon will have disseminated from the person, the plant, or the animal after 60, 70, 80, 90, 100,000 years. And then there's no more carbon in there that we could even test. So if there is carbon in there, well, that it's, they might say they would say it's thousands of years old. Now, I would beg to differ whether it's, 40,000 years old or 8,000 years old. I'm just saying that's a lot closer than 4.5 billion. Okay, that's a whole lot closer than 65 million. Let me give you an example, like the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in the Qumran caves back in 1947, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all times, where they found about 20 to 25% of all the scrolls and fragments that were found there were books of the Old Testament. Every book of the Old Testament was represented there except the book of Esther, and a part of Ezra and Nehemiah were one book in the Hebrew Bible, and Nehemiah was not represented there, but all the others were. And based upon things like, when it comes to manuscripts, people can see the kind of writing material. Like, what kind of writing material is this? What kind of letters were being written? And I don't mean like love letters. I mean like the letters, were they large letters, small letters? What style? What language was used, and what style of writing was this? Was this prominent during this period of time or that period of time? And so you have different ways of dating things, and then you bring in radiocarbon dating along with that. And these things were dated from about 175 BC to the 1st century AD. They found nearly the entire scroll of Isaiah, which dating methods show was at least a century before Christ. That's fascinating. I go into all that to say this. My question for Dr. Schweitzer was, why don't you use radiocarbon dating on these bones? These dinosaur bones that you're digging up, that you are breaking open. She said, why would we do that? I said, to see what radiocarbon date would be given. You can't use radiocarbon dating to date dinosaur bones. Well, why don't you just try it and see what happens? Dinosaur bones are millions of years old. That radiocarbon dating doesn't do any good on things that are millions of years old. But if you did do radiocarbon dating on them, maybe it would show that there's still dinosaur carbon in them, which might prove they're not millions of years old. And then she said, oh, if there was still carbon in them, then that carbon that's just been contaminated by some kind of outside source. Which I thought, well, that's interesting, because that's what I tell people all the time when you tell me this earth is 4.5 billion years old because there's a rock with this much, uranium in it and this much lead in it, and this amount of uranium breaks down into lead over billions of years, when maybe that's not really the case because of this, this, and this, but you all never listen to us when we say, what about this, this, and this? So granted, maybe some of these dinosaur bones have been contaminated by some outside source. Maybe that is the case. I don't know. When you lay something on the ground or you stick it in the dirt or sandstone for hundreds or thousands of years, yeah, maybe it was. But here's the thing. From your own words, you're telling us that these dinosaur bones were soft, still have soft, flexible fibrous tissue in them. She wouldn't budge. They were going to waste their time. I was just another kooky creationist who was wanting to talk to her about this. What we're finding, she said, is absolutely incredible, amazing preservation. It is pretty impressive. I mean, to find a bone in the ground, in sandstone, which is where you find fossils. That is sediment that has been laid down. You don't find fossils in rock that was formed from volcanoes. Okay, right? I mean, listen, if you have a little dog, sadly, that dies in a volcano fire, probably not going to fossilize. Probably going to burn up. Eric would burn up if he fell into a volcano pit. Okay, but in sandstone, silt, mud that has been laid down quickly, and you're immersed, you're overwhelmed in this, you're buried in this, you might become fossilized. Or you might not become completely fossilized. Even if it's remarkable to think about bones that might be thousands of years old that still have soft, flexible, fibrous tissue in them. The Baltimore Sun said, miraculously preserved soft tissue from the femur of a 68 million year old T-Rex. That's how they described this. Well, I can't help but think, yep, you know what? If your theory is true, and these creatures are 65 plus million years old, I believe it would take a miracle for that to still have soft, flexible. But here's the thing. You don't believe in a miracle worker. I do. And if God wanted to preserve it that way, He could have, but your whole theory is messed up. And my contention is, how is this at the very least like not some kind of neon blinking light that says, hey, maybe your theory's messed up. Maybe your timeline's all wrong. Soft, flexible, fibrous, stretchy, resilient tissue? Perhaps it's not. 70 million years old. Evolutionists contend that dinosaurs evolved around here and became extinct about 60 million years ago. Sorry that this slide's a little bit messed up here. Dr. George Gaylord Simpson suggested years ago that the only mammals which had evolved during the time of the dinosaurs were small, mostly mouse-sized, and rare. This is kind of basic evolutionary thinking over the last several decades. In 2005, Joseph Varenga said, conventional evolutionary theory said that the early mammals were timid, chipmunk-sized creatures that scurried in the looming shadow of the giant reptiles. U.S. News & World Report just a few years ago, as mammals, we like to think that we're pretty superior. The sad truth, mammals coexisted with dinosaurs for 150 million years, but were never able to get beyond little rat-like things. It's amazing to me how such like defined, adamant, I am sure about this kind of statement their statements are made, and you're like, now you know that if someone just found one fossil that was bigger than a rat, your statement is disproved. You know what happened? Again, sorry for the mess up with the slide here. A few years ago, science reported how fossils were unearthed in China of a mammal several times larger than what evolutionists previously believed to be possible during the time of the dinosaurs. In fact, one mammal had a small dinosaur called Psittacosaurus, that's what they named it, in its stomach region. There was a larger mammal, I'm not saying it was huge, but it was several times larger than rats, that were actually eating small dinosaurs at one time. 1 year later, it was announced that a mammal that looked very much like a beaver was unearthed in China in a layer of rock supposedly 164 million years old. Yeah, interestingly, that's 100 million years before most evolutionary scientists believe mammals could swim or grow larger than a shrew. I mean, think about it. The discovery of a furry beaver-like animal that lived at the same time as the dinosaurs overturned more than a century of scientific thinking about Jurassic mammals. One, fossil find. The find shows that the ecological role of mammals in the time of the dinosaurs, as Randolph Schmidt stated in 2006, was far greater than previously thought. It reminds me of a book that was printed back in, I believe it was 2008, if I remember correctly, about Nazareth in the time of Jesus is a myth. I think the book, if I remember correctly, the book is called The Nazareth Myth or something like that. And the author just said there is no archaeological proof that Nazareth was inhabited in the first century. Not any. And it was hailed as this great book. It was published by an atheistic press. It had all these statements on the book. You can read an article and watch a video about it on our website. And like Nazareth was not inhabited during the first century. This booming, this ought to make Christians just be embarrassed. You know what happened 1 year later? An excavation was done in Nazareth where they excavated a house that the experts, based upon a number of different things, believed went back to the first century AD in Nazareth. You don't hear much about that book anymore because it only took one archaeological dig to disprove. You see, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's easy to say, no mammals lived during the time of the dinosaurs that were more than little rat-like things. Well, why do you think that? Well, because we've never seen anything in the fossil record that tells us that. Well, maybe you just haven't found it yet. Or, most things that die don't fossilize. So maybe this certain creature, you're not going to find fossilized. You think you're going to fossilize, by the way? I doubt it. For things to fossilize, it takes generally a catastrophe. Oftentimes a whole lot of water, a whole lot of mud, a whole lot of silt, a whole lot of sediment. Unless you're planning on dying in some kind of catastrophic flood, and someone's going to dig you up hundreds of years later, maybe thousands. Maybe you'll still have soft, flexible fibrous tissue, You're probably not going to fossilize. Our time's getting kind of away from us. I'd like to go another maybe 10, 15 minutes here, if you will allow me. When you and I when we go somewhere that's pretty amazing. You know what Jan and I did today, I've already told you, we walked up the Lyons hill, a little more exhausting than I thought it was going to be, actually. A little harder than I thought it was going to be. I'm not in good enough shape, the fact is. But you know what? I've already talked about what we've done. You know what Jana did when we got up there to the top and you could look out and just see this beautiful, I have a phone on me that it's almost an insult to call this a phone, by the way. I mean, this is like a high-tech machine that you walk around in your hand, and it has a camera on it. Probably a better camera than we've ever had before. You know what she did? She took 2 pictures. We got to the top. You know what people do when they travel places? They take pictures and they talk about where they've been. You know what the ancients did? They talked about things they saw, places they went, and we have a number, not as much as we would like, a number of records of those things. You know what they didn't take pictures on their cell phones. The ancients didn't take 35 millimeter, cameras with them or Polaroid pictures, right? Just, oh wow, I got this Polaroid picture. I'll shake it a little bit, let the thing kind of whatever it does to, oh, there's the picture. No, but you know what they did do is they painted a lot of things and carved a lot of things. If humans ever did see dinosaurs, you would think there would be some maybe stories that were left behind. Oh, it just so happens that people all over the world have talked about these creatures, and their stories go back, as evolutionists have admitted, thousands of years. You go to the Natural Bridges National Monument in Blanding, Utah, about 40 miles west of there is the National Monument, including Kachina Bridge, one of the 3 largest natural bridges, at least in that area, and I think maybe around the world, that go back. There are petroglyphs, or rock carvings, and rock paintings, pictographs, that are believed to go back based upon the pecking of the rock, the natural desert varnish that appears over time over the rock. It's believed to go back several hundred years to the time of the Anasazi Indians, who lived in this area of the U.S. somewhere between about AD 400 and AD 1500 or thereabout. Sometimes a different name is used today, the Anasazis, to try to be a little bit more sensitive to some of the Indians who may not particularly like the meaning of this name, and that has just left me for some reason. I just learned earlier this year the term that they prefer. But at Kachina Bridge, you can find that there is, for example, this figure. What does this look like to you? Well, if you could see it a little better, most people would say there was the attempt to carve onto the rock a human figure. And there are a number of other carvings and paintings there, including handprints all over. There are mountain goats that are there with longer horns that look like almost like ibexes. There appears to be a petroglyph of a mammoth in the area. We know we have fossil evidence that mammoths used to live in that. They're not there now, but they used to. Here's another carving at Kachina Bridge. I know that looks like a giraffe, right? Or a horse. It really doesn't look like any animal that's alive today. And anytime I've shown this picture or this picture, I've never heard of someone's really say, hey, that looks like some kind of animal that's still around today. In fact, I'm going to quote 2 evolutionists here. One of Fran Barnes, who wrote in his book, American Southwest Canyon Country, the name of the book was Canyon Country Prehistoric Indians, Their Culture, Ruins, Artifacts, and Rock Art. He said there is a petroglyph or rock carving in Natural Bridges National Monument that bears a startling resemblance to a dinosaur, specifically a brontosaurus with long tail and neck, small head and all. Those were his thoughts. Another evolutionist by the name of Dennis Slifer, in his book Guide to Rock Art of the Utah Region, said one of the most curious designs is a petroglyph that resembles a dinosaur which is apparently of Anasazi origin based on its patination, based upon, again, the pecking of the rock and this natural desert varnish that covers it over a period of time. he said he is an evolutionary geologist, if I recall correctly, and he just said, hey, it looks like a dinosaur. He had it illustrated in his book like this. He didn't have a picture of it. He just had it illustrated. I don't know why he didn't show a picture of it, but this is what he showed in the illustration. And I realize that's not a scientifically accurate, representation of maybe a long neck, long tailed dinosaur, but it does look similar to what some scientists call a Mosaurus or a Cetiosaurus. There at Natural Bridges National Monument, we went in, Kyle Butt, my colleague, and I went in to talk to any individuals there who worked at the park who might talk to us. And one of them, we asked about this petroglyph at National Monument. Wanted to know more about it. And she said, well, people don't really want to talk about it. Okay. She said it was too early to be a horse. I thought, I didn't think this was a horse anyway. Didn't look like a horse to me. But I guess, maybe she had heard that some explanations that it was a horse, and said, well, it was actually too early to be a horse because the Spaniards didn't bring the horses to the Americas until the early to mid 1500s, and it was after the Anasazi had already left this area. She said it was too early to be a horse. Again, I thought, I didn't think it was a horse anyway. But she indicated that there are petroglyphs that resemble mammoths, so the petroglyph at Kachina Bridge that we're talking about may just be, she called it, some monster that the Anasazi carved on the rock. Well, you can call it what you want to, but I know what it looks like. And you know what? There are petroglyphs that have been found in other places around the world. By the way, there are dinosaur fossils in that area that have been found of a number of different dinosaurs, including Apatosaurus, also known as Brontosaurus, that have been found that are on display at a dinosaur museum. But you can find these dinosaur pictographs and petroglyphs in different places around the world. I mean, I don't know. I've never been on a tour around France or Germany. I would really like to go one day to tour a lot of the castles around. You know why? Because some of these castles that date back several hundred years, you know what a number of them, I've seen the pictures of them, have not been. You know what a number of them have carvings of? Of reptilian creatures with long tails, long necks, some of them with wings. When did we learn about dinosaurs from the fossil record? In the 1800s. These castles go back hundreds of years before then. And they have what they call dragons on them. Have you seen the Wales flag? It has a red dragon with wings on it. I'm not saying that's a scientifically accurate painting or picture of a dinosaur. I'm saying that these legends go back, and even Kurthan said there's not a creature on earth that looks more like the dragons of European legend than pterosaurs, pterodactyls, pteranodons. These kinds of carvings are found why would they be all over the world? That go back hundreds of years before we learned about dinosaurs from the fossil record. Maybe it's because people saw them, they talked about them, they carved their illustrations of them, and they passed down their stories of them for thousands, hundreds, or thousands of years. Let me give you just one other example, and then we'll call it an evening. One of the many temples in Cambodia built sometime between AD 700 and AD 1300, you can find there near Siem Reap, and it is the Ta Prohm Temple. This particular temple was made a little bit more famous in recent years in a movie that I don't necessarily recommend. I don't really know much about it. It was a movie that was made, it was a backdrop of some scenes in a Laura Croft movie, this particular Ta Prohm Temple. And here at the temple, there are a number of animals that you can find carved onto the rock. One of my very, very close friends, Brent Rice, has been there and seen this. Others have seen it, taken pictures, video footage of it. And I just want to show you that there are a number of creatures that you can find here, like this particular one that looks like a lizard or some kind of salamander, for example. There are carvings of like deer. There are carvings of monkeys. There are carvings of a number of birds. And birds that, it looks like you can tell this looks like a swan, this looks like a parrot, a number of animals. Here is Here is an animal that's carved. Some might say, well, that's a large deer. I would say it looks a little bit more like a water buffalo, maybe with his head kind of tilted to the side. I don't know for sure what it is. Some kind of animal. But under this is this creature. You know, if you want to know the honest, kind of blunt truth about something, you know, my experience has been ask a kid. You know, for example, I didn't even have to ask my kids if I was wearing something that they thought looked bad or funny. They would say, Dad, you're not going to wear that, are you? You know, if my breath is kind of stale, they would say, Dad, your breath stinks. You know, most of us would be like, would you like a mint? You want a piece of gum? You know, Bo, Mike, and Chubb would be like, Dad, that... Yeah, my point is, if you want to just get the real kind of blunt truth about something, ask a kid. You know what I've asked kids for years now about this particular carving? What does this look like? I suppose 99.99% of the time, kids have said, well, that's either, generally speaking, that's some kind of dinosaur, or that is specifically, that looks more like a stegosaurus than anything else. Well, how did someone in Cambodia, sometime between AD 700 and about AD 1300, have any idea what a dinosaur or a stegosaurus looked like if they didn't see it or one of their ancestors saw it and passed down that knowledge to them? Some might say, wait a minute, Eric, I thought this is what a stegosaurus looked like. Well, please understand, again, that is not a picture of a stegosaurus. That is an illustration, probably a computer-generated illustration. And there haven't actually been a ton of stegosaurus fossils that have been found. And by the way, do you know that 40, I'm going to try to make sure I remember this correctly, that actually there's two different figures I have in my mind. One is over 70% and one is about 45%. And this came from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences several years ago, where they indicated, now I hope I get this right, and if I get it wrong, it's on our website. You can just type in the search engine on our website and find the information. If I remember correctly, it was over 70% of all dinosaurs that have ever been named have been named from 5 fossil specimens or less. You get that? 5 fossil specimens or less, that is where 70+% of dinosaur have come from. And I believe the number was nearly 40% or more were named from one single fossil specimen. One. My point is, there's a lot of things that we hear about dinosaurs that you have to be careful about. Well, you know, we know this and we know that. Maybe we don't know exactly what this animal looked like from head to tail. By the way, my kids were given this little toy dinosaur a few years ago that was in an egg that you put in water and it hatches. And this came out. Now, does this look exactly like this? No, it doesn't. But when you ask someone, whether it's a toy manufacturer or someone to draw a stegosaurus, is it possible that you might have a larger head and a tail with no spikes, but everyone knows that you're trying to draw or manufacture a stegosaurus? Yes. If you ask me to draw a dog, it's not going to be a very good dog. I am a terrible artist. But someone might be able to say, that guy was trying to draw a dog. I'm sorry, this person was not trying to draw a pig. He wasn't trying to draw or carve a horse. I can't help but think, based upon everything that we know, that this person was drawing in a circular enclosure, if you will, kind of like this was in an egg. In a circle, he was drawing a creature that represents most likely that creature. My contention is this makes perfect sense if human beings lived with these creatures. And that what the Bible says, and what history says, and what the physical evidence actually indicates, and especially what God reveals to us in His Word, is that we're not separated from these creatures by millions of years. It's no way whatsoever what, the science guy Bill Nye says, somehow proof of evolution and that we evolved over millions of years. But actually the evidence indicates that God is the creator of all things, created the amazing dinosaurs. I say amazing. I'm not for sure they were any more amazing than elephants or any more amazing than saber-toothed tigers or killer whales. Or the average dinosaur was only the size of a bison. That's according to even evolutionists. Some of them didn't grow very large, but not most of them. Anyway, there's no evidence that they evolved over hundreds of millions of years, from 225 million years ago to 65 million years ago, and went extinct. There is a lot of reasons to have confidence in your Bible. There's a lot of reasons that you can know that God exists and that He is the creator of all things. Let's go to our God in prayer. Holy Father, thank you for this time together tonight. Thank you for these kind individuals, these kind brethren who have traveled from different places around this area and this local congregation who have been here tonight. To, in my mind, I think, even suffer through some of the things that I've said and maybe even butchered in some ways. And I just thank you for their kindness and for their patience and for them being here tonight for about 3 hours to hear about some things that we hope have been edifying, that have been glorifying to you, and that have been helpful to all who are here. Please, God, forgive us, be with us, help us to assemble with your people tomorrow as we gather to praise your holy name in spirit and in truth. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Thank you all.